Kia ora. My mountain is Verdugo, and my river is the Los Angeles River. I traveled across the ocean to New Zealand, and my waka is the Canberra. My family are trotters from Mount Brushy and the Arkansas River. And my mother's family are Murphys from Tamata Peak and the Tukituki River. And my name is Joanne Hand, and I'm very, very thankful that to be connected to this land and its people. In my life, I've lived in many countries around the world, but probably a significant portion of my life was spent in Turkey. And in that early time in Turkey, I learned two important lessons. The first lesson I learned was after living for 3 months with a Turkish family in a slum in Bursa. I got really sick. I had a mini culture shock breakdown. And I was faced with the reality that I really didn't have a clue what it meant to love and value other people. The second lesson I learned from a Kurdish man named Kutbi. We were sitting in a cafe in eastern Turkey in a city called Van overlooking Mount Ararat. And Kutbi said to me, "Abla, I was sitting in this cafe just a week ago. I was sitting here watching the people, and that table there was a group of tourists, and I watched the children run from the street and go to their table to beg for food. The tourists gave them some of their meal, and I watched the children take the food and go back to the street to eat it. Abla was so angry. I went over to those tourists, and I sat down, and first I made some small chat, where are you from, blah, blah, blah. And then he said to them, "I saw you give food to the children." "Yes," they replied. And he said, "You give food to the children, but you let them eat it in the gutter. Why would you treat them like this? They're not animals. If you give food to the children, invite them to sit at your table like a human being." It gives me like shivers to remember that, because it was such a significant shift in my life as my eyes were open to the value and dignity of every human being, whether they are guilty or innocent for their plight in life. Every person has value and worth. That was also an important lesson for me to learn at the beginning of my time in Turkey, because the very next year I was going to live through the impact of Saddam Hussein's chemical weapons attack on the Kurds in 1988. Oh, do I do it this way? Oops. Okay. So I've been back in New Zealand for a decade, and now I work for a Christian charity, global charity, that works with survivors of human trafficking, modern slavery, and abuse, doing intensive trauma recovery care. Now, just a couple of quick definitions. Modern slavery is characterized by the exploitation of vulnerable people who are forced into labor by deception or coercion, with no control over the work they do or how that work is done. And human trafficking is enmeshed in slavery, where human beings are traded and sold like commodities across borders, across countries, and forced to perform acts of labor or sexual exploitation at the profit of their owner. I've been with Hagar now for 2.5 years, and to my shame, I really didn't understand the magnitude of these issues. Through global collaboration now, it's estimated there are 40 million slaves in the world today. 71% of them are female, and 25% of them are children. And as you can see from this map, taken from the Global Slavery Index, every nation on earth is dealing with slavery and trafficking. But this area here is where 66% of all slaves are concentrated. So that is the Southeast Asia and Pacific region. In our world today, we also live with the reality, according to the International Labor Organization, that 152 million children are in child labor. 78 million of them are in hazardous work, and half of them are under the age of 12. So how did we get to this point in the 21st century? We know what makes large populations of people vulnerable. The obvious is war, extreme poverty, natural disasters like tsunamis, earthquakes, drought. But just because large populations of people are vulnerable doesn't mean that they should end up being slaves or being trafficked or being sexually exploited. So what's propelling this demand for human slaves? This is where we come in. So firstly, consumerism. This is because the demand for cheaper prices, supply chains are using cheap child and slave labor to produce our goods more cheaply. Sex, there is a global demand for access to non-consensual sex with both adults and children. And greed. These are probably our worst human vices, because slavery and trafficking generates about $150 billion in profits each year. Just to show you our connection to these issues, I'm going to show you a trailer for a documentary called The True Cost.
We communicate who we are through clothing. It is fundamentally a part of what we wish to communicate about ourselves.
We used to have a system, a fashion system. That has absolutely nothing to do with the fashion industry today. It has been reinvented.
It's based on materialism. The problem is that comes at a really high price.
Garment factory collapsed, killing more than 1,000.
Clashes between clothes factory workers and riot police in Cambodia.
Last November, 112 people were killed in another major factory fire. 30,000 Chinese workers have been on strike.
Garment workers in Bangladesh will paying the price for cheap clothing.
Well, the promise of globalization was that it was going to be a win-win, that consumers in the rich world would get cheaper goods and people in the poorer parts of the world would get jobs, and that those jobs would give them an opportunity to work their way out of poverty.
This enormous, rapacious industry that is generating so much profit, why is it that it is unable to support millions of its workers properly?
the actual business model is completely unsustainable. Unless you change that model, you can't change anything.
When everything is concentrated on making profits, what you see is that human rights, the environment, workers' rights get lost.
My God, we can do better than this.
So when we understand these issues and the part that we play in them, we have to decide whether we're okay with this. And if we are okay with it, then we can go on living how we want without any consideration for the impact of our choices on other human beings. If we're not okay with it, again, we have to decide what are the changes we need to make in our daily lives and the way we live. So we're getting towards the more positive stuff now. So Hagar's vision is for communities to be free and healed from the trauma of slavery, trafficking, and abuse. And I often get asked, where'd you get that name Hagar from? And people always have trouble pronouncing it as well. I've had Hagar. But apparently Hagar was the first recorded slave in human history. And her story is found in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. And as the story goes, God had promised Abraham and Sarah a son. And when Sarah didn't have a son, she took her slave girl, Hagar, and gave her to her husband Abraham and said, "Bear me a son through my slave girl," which Hagar did. Eventually, Sarah had her own son, and when she did, she kicked Hagar out. So Hagar ends up finding herself dying in the desert with her child. And the angel of God comes to Hagar and says, "God has seen your tears. He's going to save you, and he will make your son into a great nation." And in response, Hagar gives this name to God. She says, "You are the one who sees me." I think her story very beautifully reflects the work that Hagar does. We endeavor to see those who have lived unseen lives while suffering unspeakable violence and trauma. We come alongside them to walk on a journey of healing, which involves intensive trauma recovery for as long as it takes. We also surround them with a number of other services because our goal for every client is that they be successfully reintegrated back into their communities, equipped with education, equipped with employment, in order that they can redefine their futures. Hagar works in Afghanistan, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Singapore, all very different cultures, religions, and extremely challenging work. As this work continues, our future focus as an organization will be to train NGOs in other countries around the world in order to build global capacity to serve more survivors of slavery and trafficking. In Hagar, we talk about the whole journey, a client's whole journey with us. And just to help you understand what a journey for a Hagar client can look like, I'm going to show you another short video about Sophia's journey with Hagar.
I am Sophia, and now I know love. As a child, I lived in fear. My mother beat me and abused me. When I was 4, my father took me to the province and left me there.
Hagar works in Cambodia, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Singapore. We provide comprehensive services to people who have experienced extreme forms of abuse and exploitation.
The people he left me with were violent. They treated me like a dog. I was their slave. I was forced to do housework. I never washed.
We work with survivors of slavery and human trafficking, physical and sexual abuse in their most severe forms.
There was never enough food. When other children went to school, I went to the field to take care of the cows.
The people Hagar works with are severely traumatized. They are suffering from depression and suicidal thoughts, with no belief in their own self-worth or the possibility of a better future.
When I tried to escape, they would find me and beat me again. I had no name. They called me the ugly one. Many times I harmed myself. I remember the day I escaped. I was 12 years old. I saw the bicycle and stole it. I pedaled as fast as I could towards love.
And then she came to Hagar when she was 12 years old, and things started to change.
Hagar found me. They made me feel safe. They placed me in a loving and caring home.
She has a hope and a dream. So now she's achieving her dreams.
We do whatever it takes to help people to heal and to thrive. Case management and counselling. We ensure they have safe accommodation and employment and access to justice and education.
What she has experienced and what she has received from Hagar and also other people around to help her like Sophia today. And she wants to come back and help those people.
I finished secondary school and university. Now I am a social worker.
And what I see now, over 12 years later, is a strong, empowered, brave, smart woman who wants to make change in her community and ultimately in her country.
We do the whole journey of the client. We don't give up. We walk with them, behind them, alongside them.
We amplify the voices of our incredible survivors through storytelling across the world. And it's so important that we do that because it can be a really significant part of someone's healing journey to feel like they can share what has happened with them and to feel like it doesn't define them any longer.
Slavery and human trafficking is a global problem. Hagar helps people heal one person at a time, because when healing happens, the cycle of trauma stops.
I am Sophia, and now I know love.
So if you think about trauma recovery as a series of steps, for Sophia, it started right at the, let me turn around here, right at the bottom with safe accommodation, medical care because she endured violence for a period of 8 years. She received legal support, to prosecute her perpetrators. And then these steps here are the steps of trauma recovery, which is a different period of time for every individual. And as you heard from the video, Sophia was able to accomplish her education, go on to uni, and is now a social worker working with girls like herself. I had the opportunity to meet her. I've been telling her story for a couple of years, but I got my first opportunity to visit Cambodia last year and see Hagar's program work. And I didn't know I would meet Sophia because she's no longer with Hagar. But she came to a dinner I was at, and she showed up on her little blue moped from Phnom Penh traffic. And I guess I wasn't prepared for what that healing looks like, because she was happy, laughing, joking, confident, taking selfies, and it was a little bit overwhelming to think that that was her story, but it's not who she is. Sophia's story continues. This is a picture of her in 2017. She was chosen to be flown to Australia to speak in front of a parliamentary inquiry committee because Australia were drafting their Modern Slavery Act. So this young woman who once could not speak because of her trauma told her story of slavery, and it was broadcast to millions of people. So I truly believe that one person can have far-reaching impact in the world. Hagar is currently serving 500 women and children across the countries that they work in. And for 25 years, it's our donors who have helped transform the lives of 19,000 clients. And because at Hagar, we are committed to that journey, whatever it takes for as long as it takes. We see 81% of all clients successfully reintegrated back into their communities. Now, I've chosen this photo here. You can't see it so well, but this is Ritti. And Ritti lost his last living family member when he was a toddler and somehow survived on the streets of Phnom Penh. He was eventually identified by World Vision and taken into one of their programs, but he was extremely traumatized and had very difficult behaviors, so he was referred to Hagar. This is an actual picture of Ritti at 10 years old when he came to Hagar. And he's holding up a paper that says, "My name is Ritti, I'm 10 years old, I want to be a doctor." I understand that Ritti's journey with Hagar was quite volatile. He ran away a number of times. He couldn't understand what schooling was about. He was very angry. And I think some of the staff members were actually scared of him. But Hagar persisted, and Ritti persisted as well. Against all odds, he forged ahead, learning how to be human, learning how to study, learning how to control his anger. He still has a little bit. And learning how to build relationships. Just over a year ago, I heard that Ritti was going to be visiting New Zealand. And he's no longer with Hagar, but I contacted him to see if he'd be willing to do an event for Hagar in Auckland. So he called me on WhatsApp, and we're chatting on the phone for the first time, and he says to me, "I should be dead." And I'm like, what do I do? God had a plan for my life. So in February last year, I had the privilege of meeting Dr. Ritti Hong. And he did come and speak at an event for Hagar in Papatoetoe. And we listened to his story. And I have to say, it was the most gritty, compelling presentation I've ever heard. He was that kid, nameless among many, living on the streets, scrounging for food, trying to survive another day. At one point in his presentation, he began to weep, and so I got up to stand with him. And pretty soon, everyone in the room was weeping as he went on to tell us about the atrocities he'd witnessed as a child among his people and how those things had impacted his desire to become a doctor. Now, as a qualified GP and still studying to become a qualified surgeon, he runs clinics, medical clinics in the slums of Phnom Penh. And he said to us, he said, when I'm treating a child like this, I ask them, what is your dream? And he laughs because he said, they always say the same thing, to find food tomorrow. And Ritti looks them in the eye and says, look at me. I was exactly like you, and now I'm a doctor. You have to find a bigger dream. Hope is a very powerful, motivating force for change, and I love that Ritti is telling children in the slums of Phnom Penh every day to go and find bigger dreams. Oops, wrong one. Oops, wrong one. Oh, come on, I only made one real mistake. So I hope that I've been able to communicate that you see this wonderful tapestry of interwoven relationships across the globe where we connect with one another to create social value in the world. So what can you do as a global citizen? I have 3 things to suggest. The first one is to start with small changes. Try to buy ethically sourced products. And this conference is a great resource for you. There'll be lots of people in the marketplace, and make sure that you avail yourself of that and learn more about this. Hagar is very fortunate. We have a partnership with a social enterprise business that is, it's a vineyard in the South Island who've made a range of 4 wines, top quality New Zealand wines, and they're giving 100% of the profits to Hagar's work. Woo! That's very good. If you want to know more about 27 Seconds or more about Hagar, I'll also be in the marketplace, so please come chat with me. Number 2 is a little bit more painful. Be willing to pay more for products that guarantee they haven't used child or slave labor. And number 3 is also a little painful. Give your financial support to NGOs and charities that are actively making a difference in the issues that you care about. And again, this conference is going to provide wonderful resources for you, so please do avail yourself of those in the marketplace. Finally, I want to thank Susan, wherever she went, for organizing this conference to bring us all together, and for all of you as participants in this significant event. And I leave you with Ritty's challenge to all of us to continue to seek and find bigger dreams, to push us towards a better future for all. Thank you.
Try that one.
Okay. Take two. These are microphones, yes they are. So we can throw them around, and I'm going to throw it. Who had the question?
In the list of organisations that you mentioned Hagar worked with, Singapore really stood out as like a very developed and wealthy country. What is it that Hagar does there?
We are doing trauma recovery. What happens in Singapore is that a lot of people from other countries are recruited as domestic workers, and then they end up finding themselves in slavery. And then once they, if they escape, they have no rights in Singapore. So we're doing a bit of that type of work, of helping them in their trauma recovery, trying to get them all that they need to be able to exit Singapore and go back to their homes and still have connections wherever they're being sent to.
Okay, so you,
I have to throw it. I'm just going to come a bit closer.
It's good, thanks.
With the problem of slavery, with the staggering figures that you just gave us for, how do you actually decide who gets in your program and who doesn't?
Yes, so we have program criteria. So in the countries we work in, we collaborate with any other NGOs or any national organizations, women's organizations in that country. And if there are services that are more suitable to a client, like they may be from this province and there is a service out there by another organization, we would refer them. But mostly we take the most traumatized because we've developed a model of trauma-informed care that is working for healing from these extreme human rights abuses. So we do a lot of collaborating and join in all the networks. For example, in Cambodia, they have a fabulous network of all the organizations working in slavery and trafficking and women's issues and abuse. So there's this network of resource where we can all find the perfect fit for a client. Yeah. Yeah. You got to throw it that way. There, yay.
Promise you can't break it. Break another person though in the way.
Thank you, Joanne. That was a really powerful presentation.
Thank you.
I knew those statistics, but over time you can kind of lose the connection with the people that are behind those statistics. So it's just really great to hear and be reminded of. A question about the 81% success rate. What constitutes success versus not successfully being reintegrated? Is that 19% of people going back to the life they had, or is it their own self-evaluation, or?
I think it's various reasons. We're using the 81% because they are the ones that we can track that have self-confessed that stage of life now where they are free from their trauma, they've got education, they've got a job, they're back in their community, they're healthy. For the ones that aren't, that as far as I know from what I've been told from international is that we do refer a lot of clients as well, because sometimes their needs are beyond Hagar. So those would not be seen as a successful reintegration. They would have been referred to something else or possibly moved to another organization. So the reason that we do the long journey with clients is that it does take a long time to get that success rate. So if we didn't do that, if we had a time-constrained program, people would end up being vulnerable to being re-trafficked. If they can't get employment, there are no jobs, there is no food, and that's what happens. So I'm not sure I've answered it well enough, that question. I will make sure that I am better informed next time.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think it's a Hagar success rate as opposed to, not knowing what other people have gone on.
But it is, like you say, it's that is a problem with organizations working in this issue, that if they're not empowered with education and employment, they're highly likely to be re-trafficked.
Thank you.
I'm transporting this in a responsible manner. There we go.
Thank you, that was amazing. You mentioned one of the steps to recovery is shelter.
Yep.
I wanted to ask, do you have group homes or foster care systems? Where do you start with taking a child or a woman?
Yes, well, Hagar's been around for 25 years now, so when they first started out, they did use the shelter model, but we no longer use that. So, for example, any children that come into Hagar, we have foster families, and I had the privilege of meeting one of those families when I visited Cambodia, and he's a pastor in the local community. They live way out in the boondocks, but they take in Hagar children, and they just become part of their family with their children. They go to school, and Hagar, although it involves a bit of traveling, is able to provide trauma recovery within that setting. So we find that children thrive more when they have a safe home, they can go to school, and life has the appearance of normal again.
Thanks, Joanne. That's great. Yep. Obviously, with the work you're doing in New Zealand, and for many of the people here, there we go. One of the challenges is to get New Zealanders to face the reality of these issues that you talked about, and to understand how fortunate or blessed they are in New Zealand, and then to move to making personal changes that can make a difference for the less fortunate overseas. And obviously it's hard work to get people to go on that change, and some don't even want to look at it, let alone move on that journey. Do you have any insights into what you find works with helping people move in that direction?
No. I know my own personal life that I struggle daily to make better choices. I mean, honestly, I'm at the stage now where I think, do I really need to drive out in my car again? Can I wait till tomorrow when I'm doing a lot of other things, because I'm polluting the planet. So that's how extreme it is in my life. But I think you just do the best you can. We obviously, a characteristic of our society today is that we love buying stuff. But we got to think about where it comes from, and do we really need it? And why not invest a little bit more time in relationships that bring more value and worth to your life than spending it on stuff? That might be a bit harsh. Any other questions? Thank you very much.